The company was started in 2009 under the name AdSafe, and at the time the company was created to address a problem in the industry, and it was inventory being purchased. At that time largely in display, although it happened in video, where you purchase an ad and it ends up on a page that it has inappropriate content. And that might be adult content, it might be illegal download content, it might be hate speech. It's something that as a brand you do not want your image associated with. So it's a problem that we recognize as one that needed addressing, and at the time every technology just gave a report that showed you where there was a problem, and what we did differently is we actually stopped the ad in an ad call, stopped it from appearing on that site. As a company, what happened is we recognized that ad safety is just one problem if you have the wrong environment. At the end of the day, there's all kinds of other problems. First of all, waste, ads aren't being seen, you're buying fraudulent users. It's really, there's a lot of ads on it, a lot of clutter, just really low quality inventory. And then ultimately we recognize that your performance is suboptimal if you're not focusing on what media you're buying. So what we've as a company done is figured out how to take as much data as we can about different media environments, and that includes video as well as mobile, and coming up with metrics to help both buyers and sellers understand how to buy and sell them and how to price them. And video is a big area for us because video is something that has higher CPMs. There's an automatic association with higher quality around video, and a lot of times what we're seeing is you're not necessarily getting what you pay for. There's a very low quality video and environments around video as well, so it's important to note that. First of all, there's a lot of confusion over what fraud is, and a lot of people say fraud is illegal download content. Some people say fraud is a page that has a lot of ads on it. The strict definition as defined by the IAB of what fraud is, and what we agree with, is an ad that has absolutely no chance of being seen by a human, zero chance. There's a lot of pages where they'll have 30 ads on the page, a lot of them really low on the page. Typically users never see them. That's not fraud, that's just really low quality. And unfortunately there's a lot of inventory out there like that. But fraud itself is a new problem, a relatively new one, at least in awareness-wise, that's come up and that the industry is now really focused on addressing. And it's an important problem, and it is a big problem, because what we have is several ways of doing it, but at the end of the day, a deception where there's no chance for an ad to be seen, yet dollars collected under the assumption that the ad is seen. Typical fraud is seen in a few different ways. One is ad stacking. That's where there's several ads on top of one ad, so every ad underneath the first ad is not seen, even though it's getting credited for being in view. The second way is to take actually a whole site with lots of ads on it, put it in a 1x1 pixel, so everything is getting squished so small you can't see it, and putting it on high traffic sites. In a report, if you run your third-party ad serving report, it looks like your ads were on the page, and a lot of times it gets credit for last touch or view-through conversions, and you think it's working really well and you buy more of it. Turns out it's really just a 1x1 pixel. The third way, which we actually seeing as the most prevalent, are bots, and that's what's getting the most press. And essentially what it is a computer network that takes over someone's computer, multiple computers, hundreds of thousands of computers, and directs them to go to websites and visits a website and gets credit. The view gets credit to that website, and inventory is purchased, and money changes hands, and yet no human actually saw the inventory. The way you get this is it's a typical virus. You download some software, it's riding behind the software download, and in the background while you're surfing or when your computer's sitting there on, it's actually surfing websites. Bots are getting more sophisticated. Initially, they were just viewing inventory. Then what they recognized is that people started to use viewability as a metric. So what the bots would do is purposely scroll the ad into view for a long period of time, including with video now. They can actually make sure that the whole ad is seen, and then stop there. So the sophistication continues to increase. Every metric that we use in the industry, they've backed into figuring out how, or figured out how to back into looking really good with those metrics. So that's the purpose, is deception, and the purpose is to win any optimization. We typically see fraud on just about every site. The levels definitely are different depending on the site, but fraud has, the way fraud's programmed is to a lot of times go to a high value premium site to get a cookie on its browser, and then go to other sites where people are going to target it based on that cookie. So fraud, just because a site has fraud does not mean that it's a bad site or a illegal or a site that's trying to defraud. In a lot of cases, people don't know they have it, and because fraud has no discrimination, typically, we see it across the board. Now, the reality is where the money is made, that's where we have to stop it, and it's important to look at, and it's typically in two ways. One is a site that's been created as a fake site, and eventually traffic is sent to that site, and it's monetized, and typically it's not like monetized directly with the person who's creating the fraud. There's several layers. It's laundering money. It's really several layers through to actually find the person who's creating the fraud. That's the first one. Now, that's what everyone thinks for the most part is happening in the industry, so people are saying you should have a blacklist and stop that from happening. The reality is a lot of fraud we see are legitimate sites who decide that they want to buy traffic, and most sites do that because they want to fill certain inventory requirements, or they want to continue to hit certain metrics they have around audience. And so they're buying audience, and the reality is that some of that audience tends to be fraudulent. So then what we see is a legitimate site who might have 10 or 15% fraud due to one or two bad sources of inventory that they're buying. So it's an important distinction, because if we decide that any site that has over 5% say fraud is fraudulent, you're going to eliminate a lot of inventory in the industry. Which brings me to why I think the whole industry is, or at least a lot of the people who are talking about fraud and how big it is, are actually exaggerating the problem. You see numbers thrown out there like $20 billion problem in the industry, and that's just way too high. It's not as high as that. And I think there's a few reasons for that. One is technology itself. Typically, first of all, fraud is at a user level. It's not at a site level. But a lot of the technologies who are calculating this or looking for detecting it, they don't have the ability to detect it and store it at a user level, so they roll it up to a site level. So what I mean by that is, in the example I mentioned, a site who's buying fraudulent traffic. There's a site we were working with recently who had 15% fraudulent traffic, and several vendors had them registered or reported as 100% fraud. So that's absolutely wrong. Only 15% of their traffic is fraudulent, yet they're reported as 100%. And that's because a lot of the technologies, again, are binary, fraudulent or not fraudulent, and if you hit a certain threshold, they'll automatically assume the whole thing's fraudulent. When you roll that up, you realize that the numbers get really, really staggering in terms of the percentage of inventory that's fraudulent, when in reality it's not quite that high.